Intravisual, fast-paced, high-contrast roll of Shenzhen, neon skyline blurring into dramatic graphics. Tribographic overlay, 840 million thousand, silent sinkhole effects, urgent cable news ticker, deep sub-bass boom narrator. Right now, at number 1888 Binhai Avenue in Shenzhen's most exclusive coastal district, a 195-meter ultra-luxury skyscraper is sinking into the earth. It is not failing because the contractor stole the cement. It is not failing because it was abandoned. It is sliding downward because the very bedrock of the reclaimed coastline beneath it is giving way. And the elite consortium that sold 5.8 billion yuan, nearly 840 million US dollars, worth of hyper-luxury penthouses inside it, may have known the coast was shifting before the final wealthy buyer ever signed the deed. Drone swoop, metal strain, wine narrator, 3 inches. That is exactly 7.6 centimeters. That is how far the Grand Horizon Automotive Tower has dropped since its grand opening. This is a structure worth more per square meter than almost any residential high-rise in southern China. Moving downward at a trajectory its own chief designers swore was mathematically impossible. And the catastrophic reality of what that silence is costing the multi-millionaires living inside is only now breaching the surface. Graphic. Full-screen map of Shenzhen Bay, highlighting reclaimed land zone in blood. Red narrator. To understand how a trophy tower becomes a multi-billion yuan trap, you have to meet the man who engineered the gamble. His name is Li Desheng. In 2012, Li made what the local financial press called the most audacious bet in the history of Guangdong real estate. He authorized a massive 260 million yuan payout just to secure a narrow, premium plot of coastal silt along Binhai Avenue, a fragile strip of land wedged tightly between the South China Sea and the mangrove marshes of Shenzhen Bay. Li told the municipal planning boards it was the most coveted waterfront address in the interior. Greater Bay Area. His vision was unapologetic, explicit, and wildly expensive. A 60-story residential monolith that would stand as the first tower in Asia, where billionaires could drive their supercars directly into an automated high-speed elevator, keeping them seated in their vehicles until they reached their private living rooms on the 50th floor. FX, mechanical whoosh, hydraulic clank narrator. He called the patent pending high-speed lift system the Desheng Vader. He retained the absolute top tier of architectural prestige, the Guangzhou Institute of Architectural Design, to draft the blueprints. To seal the luxury illusion, he flew to Europe, signing a master branding agreement with a legendary German luxury design house, marking the first time a global automotive lifestyle brand had ever permitted its name to be stamped onto a residential skyscraper in mainland China. The initial construction budget was pinned at 3.8 billion yuan. The luxury complex was slated to welcome its first elite residents by late 2016. Every single one of the 132 super units was snapped up during pre-sales. Entry-level apartments started at 45 million yuan, while the massive 4-story sky mansion at the pinnacle was listed at an astronomical 225 million yuan. It generated billions in cash commitments from buyers who believed every single glossy rendering on the marketing brochure. But here is the devastating data point that nobody told those buyers. Before the very first billionaire pushed the button inside the Desheng Vader to lift their Ferrari to their sky garage, satellite radar arrays and researchers at the Guangdong Bureau of Geology were already picking up an ominous signature beneath the foundation. The deep-set marine clay and subcoastal strata were refusing to hold. The crisis didn't just crawl up from the basement. The vulnerability was engineered into the blueprints from day one. Visual. Cut to animated 3D cross-section of the Shenzhen coastal shelf. Blueprints glow high contrast yellow as the ground beneath them torn from solid gray to crumbling brown effects. Low freak ground thump. Digital countdown ticking narrator. Here is the number that should stop every real estate investor cold. Just 7 kilometers down the same coastline lies the infamous Wanhai Bay Block 3, the residential complex that suffered a sudden, catastrophic structural failure during basement excavation in 2021, forcing the emergency evacuation of thousands of neighboring residents in the dead of night. When a specialized team from the China Academy of Building Research analyzed the satellite radar data across the entire municipal coastline. They discovered something terrifying. While the surrounding coastal developments had stabilized into the mud, the Grand Horizon Automotive Tower was behaving like a foreign object sinking into quicksand. It was logging the highest rate of active subsidence in the entire coastal data set. Since the final concrete pour, this 195-meter monument to wealth has dropped nearly 80 millimeters into the earth. Graphic. Text flash on screen. Subsurface subsidence. Fa instructural torquet narrator. To understand why 80 millimeters is a structural nightmare, you have to throw away the marketing brochures and look at the brutal physics of high-rise engineering in a 60-story tower. Every single floor plate, every load-bearing column, and every deep-driven friction pile forms an interconnected web of tension and compression. There is zero margin for error. There is no structural redundancy when the ground beneath the north-facing elevator core moves downward faster than the ground beneath the south-facing residential wing. Engineers call this specific failure state differential settlement. The skyscraper does not drop cleanly like an elevator in a shaft. It tilts, it torques, it twists. One quadrant of the foundation drops while another grips the shifting earth. That uneven movement sends millions of pascals of internal stress, tearing through every reinforced concrete slab, buckling the heavy window frames, and putting immense crushing shear forces on every critical utility, water, and gas line feeding the upper floors. Visual, archival footage of massive rotary drilling rigs in Shenzhen. Timestamps flashing. Mark 2013, August 14 orator. Back in 2013, during the initial excavation phase, Li Desheng's engineering team stood at a multi-million yuan crossroads. They had two choices. Option A, they could halt the project timeline, spend an estimated 120 million yuan, and conduct exhaustive, highly advanced geotechnical drilling to map the unpredictable. Waterlogged marine clay layers and variable bedrock deep under the specific coordinates of Binhai Avenue, or option B, they could rely on the standard friction pile foundation models that had been used across the less challenging parts of the Shenzhen coastline. Assume the subsurface soil would behave predictably, and keep the rapid construction schedule on track. FX. Cash Radder Chime cut court by industrial metal clang narrator. Cost and speed. 1. The digital design models checked out on paper. The local construction commission, relying on the developer's certified independent engineering reports, stamped the permits. The math worked perfectly. In a computer simulation, traditional pile foundations along the Guangdong coast are engineered to withstand a few centimeters of uniform total settlement across a whole structure as it settles into its footprint. But those equations completely break down in a scenario where different pockets of the Earth move at completely different speeds. The subsurface reality of Shenzhen's reclaimed bay areas is a chaotic, unpredictable patchwork of loose marine sand, soft silt, and highly porous decomposed granite. When you slam the immense, focused weight of a 195-meter luxury tower directly onto those uneven layers, the physics change. Combine that massive downward pressure with the relentless seismic vibrations of heavy construction on adjacent plots, and throw in the daily, aggressive movement of high-tide saltwater rushing through the porous earth beneath the seawall. The result? You create an underground acceleration zone. The structural vulnerability wasn't an accident. It was baked into the project's timeline before the first bucket of mud was excavated. Visual, satellite radar infrared scan plotting ground movement with chronological tumbling graph from 2016 to 2026 narrator. Stay with me, because the chronological data proves the warnings didn't start yesterday. September 2016, the structural frame of the Grand Horizon Automotive Tower is topped out. The glass curtain wall is being sealed, but high-resolution satellite radar records show the ground beneath the main tower is already dipping beyond the projected tolerance curve. The subsidence trend line is pointing straight down. The developer files no notices. December 2017, the tower officially opens to its ultra-wealthy residents. The Desheng Veitor begins shuttling rare sports cars up to Sky Garage's 50 floors above the bay. In the secondary luxury market, prices skyrocket. Wealthy investors pay 60 million, 80 million yuan for units. The marketing division calls the tower the crown jewel of southern China's modern architecture. June 2023, a dedicated research team at the Municipal Institute of Earth Sciences, utilizing advanced synthetic aperture radar data from specialized Earth imaging satellites capable of tracking surface displacement down to a single millimeter, completes a 7-year longitudinal study of the coastline. Their final, peer-reviewed conclusion is absolute and terrifying. 35 major high-rise structures along this specific coastal strip are experiencing active subsidence. But the Grand Horizon Automotive Tower isn't just on the list. It is leading the pack with the highest rate of uneven sinking in the entire zone. Nearly 70% of the ultra-high-density high-rises built on this section of Binhai Avenue are actively moving. The study's senior authors noted that the continuous downward movement of these massive coastal structures shows no statistical signs of slowing down. In plain terms, the city underneath the tower is refusing to stabilize. Yet, as the calendar turned to early 2024, no comprehensive structural audit was made public by the property management. No warning disclosures were filed with prospective buyers on the resale market. Millionaires looking to buy into the tower were handed the exact same pristine, glossy brochures printed during the pre-sale hype of 2016. The ground beneath the foundation had shifted drastically. The marketing, however, remained completely frozen. Visual, montage of high-rise failures across urban China. Flash of archival footage. The Shenzhen'S Plaza shaking in 2021. The Tianjin Golden Finance 117 standing ghostly and unfinished. The cataclysmic 2009 collapse of the Lotus Riverside apartment tower in Shanghai. FX. Deep rumble. Dramatic orchestral hits. Sirens echoing in the distance. Narrator. To truly comprehend the scale of the crisis unfolding at the Grand Horizon Automotive Tower, you have to look beyond the borders of Shenzhen. You have to understand that this is not an isolated architectural glitch. It is the systemic symptom of a hyper-accelerated building boom that has pushed the limits of civil engineering further and faster than anywhere else on Earth. China's megacities boast some of the tallest, heaviest, and most structurally complex skylines in human history. But when you build at the speed of thought, the laws of physics eventually demand an accounting. Consider what happened in Shanghai back in 2009. A disaster that remains a core case study at the China Academy of Building Research. A nearly completed 13-story residential block at the Lotus Riverside complex suddenly toppled backward, practically intact, killing a construction worker. The cause? Workers had piled excavated dirt 10 meters high on one side of the building while digging an underground parking garage on the other. The immense, uneven pressure caused a sudden, catastrophic shift in the water-saturated riverbank soil, snapping the hollow concrete friction piles like matchsticks. Graphic. Side-by-side 3D comparison diagram. Shanghai Lotus Riverside. Sudan Pile Fascia vs. Shenzhen Grand Horizon. Gradual differential torque. Narrator. The Shanghai disaster was a brutal lesson in lateral soil pressure. But what is happening right now under the Grand Horizon Automotive Tower in Shenzhen is arguably more insidious. It is not a sudden explosive failure caused by a wall of mud. It is a slow, agonizing, irreversible strangulation of a building's skeleton. Look across the Pearl River Delta to Guangzhou. For decades, engineers there have battled the treacherous soft soil matrix of the Delta's alluvial plains. When iconic supertalls like the Guangzhou CTF Finance Center or the Canton Tower were anchored into the earth, their foundations had to penetrate deep into massive solid bedrock layers using specialized ultra-thick board piles. Why? Because the upper layers of silt and clay behave less like solid ground and more like a fluid mass under extreme weight. But in the rush to capitalize on Shenzhen's ultra-lucrative Binhai Avenue waterfront, the developers of Grand Horizon didn't anchor into deep, predictable continental granite. They anchored into the volatile, shifting geology of a rapidly reclaimed coastline. Visual. News. Rush of the May 2021 Seg Plaza evacuation in Shenzhen. Footage shows thousands of people running in panic through the streets as the 70-story skyscraper swathes out of control. Crowd screams, megaphone announcements, high-pitched wind narrator. No one in Shenzhen can forget May 18, 2021. The Seg Plaza, a massive 356-meter skyscraper in the heart of the Fujian district, suddenly began to shake violently. There was no earthquake. There were no high winds. Thousands of tech workers and shoppers fled into the streets in absolute panic. It took months of high-level investigation by a joint task force of national structural experts to pinpoint the culprit, a combination of solar-induced thermal expansion, wind resonance, and most importantly, subtle micro-settlement variations in the building's structural base that created a devastating mechanical feedback loop. The building was vibrating itself to pieces from the inside out. The Seg Plaza survived because it was built with a robust steel and concrete composite core that could flex under extreme stress. But the Grand Horizon Automotive Tower isn't a commercial office building engineered for structural flexibility. It is a hyperdense residential column carrying the concentrated, dead weight of massive concrete floor plates, heavy glass curtain walls, and a multi-thousand-ton automated internal elevator system designed to lift armored SUVs 60 stories into the sky. FX, Industrial Ching Clank, Metallic Groan Narrator. When differential settlement attacks a building of this specific configuration, the internal stresses don't dissipate. They accumulate. Every millimeter of uneven drop between the central elevator shaft, the core carrying the heavy Desheng Vader, and the outer residential columns creates an invisible, structural shear zone. Imagine a massive sheet of structural glass or a high-strength concrete beam. It can support thousands of tons of vertical pressure. But if you hold one end perfectly still and push down on the other by just a fraction of a degree, the material enters a state of high shear stress. Microfractures begin to spikeweb through the internal matrix. The high-performance waterproofing seals around the subterranean basement layers begin to tear, allowing highly corrosive, hypersaline tidal water from Shenzhen Bay to seep directly into the reinforced steel rebar. Once that salt water reaches the steel, a chemical countdown begins. The rebar oxidizes, expands, and shatters the surrounding concrete from within. This is the exact structural nightmare that municipal construction commissions across China are terrified of encountering. It is a slow-motion architectural train wreck. The Grand Horizon Automotive Tower is sitting just kilometers away from some of the most advanced engineering marvels in the world. Yet its foundation is bound to a geological time bomb that is ticking louder with every passing tide. Visual, dramatic reaction shot. The screen fades from explanatory blueprints to the rain-slicked pavement of Benhaiguven in Shenzhen. A stark, high-contrast portrait of a young Chinese woman in impossibly luxury designer trench coat appears. She is looking up at the disappearing apex of the Grand Horizon's Automotive Tower, hidden in cold, low-hanging sea fog. FX, low distant traffic hum, the steady rhythmic drip of rain on metal. A deep, reverberating throb from a nearby hydraulic pillared river narrator. When we talk about 5 billion yuan evaporating into the mud of Shenzhen Bay, it is easy to get lost in the cold mathematics of structural engineering. It is easy to look at graphs of differential settlement and forget that inside this sinking monument of steel and glass, people are trapped. Not physically trapped behind barricaded doors. At least, not yet, but financially and psychologically gridlocked inside a nightmare they paid tens of millions of yuan to enter. Her name is Zhang Min. She is a 34-year-old tech entrepreneur who built a fortune in the semiconductor logistics boom of the late 2010s. In early 2024, seeking a safe, ultra-prestigious vessel to store her capital and protect her family's generational wealth, she purchased a mid-resale penthouse, the 38th floor of the Grand Horizon Automotive Tower. The transaction cleared at a staggering 62 million yuan, nearly $9 million US. Brief flash of camera shutter, a Kriek whisper narrator. Zhang Min didn't find out about the satellite monitoring data from the local housing bureau. She didn't find out from the premium real estate brokerage that took a massive commission on her closing contract. She found out while scrolling through a regional macroeconomic research forum late at night, coming across a translated copy of the University of Miami and Municipal Institute of Earth Sciences longitudinal study. We spoke with her under an absolute guarantee of anonymity. Her real name does not match the property registry, but her voice carries the raw, unedited panic of someone who realized her dream palace was tilting toward a catastrophic structural ledger. Graphic, quote on screen, over black back, text, textured with grain. It wasn't just the realization of the money, she told us, her hands gripping a teacup in a high-end cafe just blocks from the tower. It was the absolute paralyzing feeling that everything you were told was a calculated illusion. You drive your car into the lift, the doors close, the machinery hums, and you think you are king of the world. Then you read that while you were sleeping, the north corner of your living room sank 4 millimeters lower than your master bedroom. You look at the glass walls, and suddenly, you don't see luxury anymore. You see an existential cage. Visual. Intense close-up of an anonymous cell phone screen showing Rinsenal resident WeChat groups. The chat stream is fluid with pictures of hairline cracks in concrete subfloors and aligned videos of marbles rolling unassisted across polished marble floors. FX. Strix hiss. The despective ping of WeChat mosses arriving in rapid succession narrator. Behind the heavy gold-leafed security gates of the Grand Horizon complex, an elite civil war is brewing. In private, encrypted WeChat channels accessible only to the building's verified owners, the mood has completely shifted from high-class vanity to absolute survivalism. Wealthy tycoons, international venture capitalists, and high-ranking manufacturing executives are quietly sharing photographic evidence of a building under extreme structural stress. Look at this footage smuggled out of a unit on the 24th floor. The owner noticed that the heavy, triple-glazed acoustic window frames, designed to block out the roaring winds of the South China Sea, had begun to bind in their tracks. It started as a subtle squeak. By late 2024, the structural distortion was so severe that the automated electric motors burned out trying to slide the heavy glass panels open. Why? Because the entire window frame had been squeezed into a subtle parallelogram by the shifting, twisting concrete slabs above and below it. SFX. Sharp snap of breaking glass narrator. Even more chilling are the reports emerging from the sub-basement parking levels, the very heart of Li Desheng's automotive paradise. To accommodate the massive hydraulic systems and guide rails for the Desheng VAT, or car lifts, the developer had to excavate a multi-level basement footprint deep below the active water table of Shenzhen Bay. This subterranean labyrinth is shielded from the ocean by a massive, reinforced concrete slurry wall. But as the tower undergoes differential settlement, that slurry wall is being subjected to bending moments it was never designed to absorb. In late 2025, maintenance crews working the midnight shift documented the first instances of brine weeping, high-pressure jets of hypersaline groundwater, forcing its way through micro-fissures in the structural foundation walls. The water leaking into the lowest levels isn't rainwater. It is the ocean. It is the highly corrosive tidal flow of the Bay, acting as a grinding paste against the high tensile steel anchors that keep the building's main elevator core from shifting laterally. Visual. High-speed camera pans up the sheer, vernal profile of the towers, intercut with the shadowy figures of revenue, officers and real estate lawyers in economic district courts. Narrator. And what are the damages in terms of raw economic capital? They are catastrophic. In early 2024, before the technical study went viral among the elite investment circles of southern China, a premium 3-bedroom unit on the 42nd floor could easily command 55 million yuan on the secondary market. Today, that market is completely dead. Real estate appraisers from major national banks have quietly adjusted the asset value of the Grand Horizon Automotive Tower on their internal risk ledgers. If a buyer attempts to secure a mortgage for a resale unit inside the tower today, the compliance systems flag the asset. The loan-to-value ratios have plummeted, in some cases requiring an outright 100% cash down payment because the banking sector refuses to assume the collateral risk of a building whose structural future cannot be guaranteed. SFX. Deep, triple, dramatic beat narrator. Think about the absolute financial destruction this represents. For the owners inside, their multi-million yuan luxury assets have been effectively frozen. They cannot sell without disclosing the structural condition to sophisticated buyers who will demand a 50% haircut on the price. They cannot sue the developer without triggering a public media storm that would instantly tank the value of the building to absolute zero. They are trapped in a conspiracy of silence, forced to smile and pretend everything is pristine while the ground beneath their luxury leather car seats slips further into the sand. We reached out to 3 separate, independent structural engineering firms operating within the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area. We asked them a simple, direct question. What happens if the differential settlement rate accelerates during the upcoming typhoon season, when torrential rains liquefy the upper sand layers and high winds place immense lateral loads on the upper 40 floors? One veteran engineer, who spent 20 years supervising foundation stabilization projects for municipal train networks in Guangzhou, spoke to us on the condition that we disguise his voice. Audio. Enhanced, altered voice filter with reverb. The problem with a building built around a central heavy automotive elevator shaft is that your center of mass is highly rigid and incredibly unforgiving. If the perimeter columns settle unevenly while the central core stays rigid, you are essentially loading the internal concrete floor plates like a diving board. They are being bent over a knee. If the rate increases by even 2 millimeters a year beyond the current curve, the microcracks will become structural shear failures. You will see internal concrete spalling. You will see plumbing main lines snap across 40 floors simultaneously. It won't be an overnight collapse like an earthquake, but it will be an immediate occupancy ban by the local housing bureau. The building will become an uninhabitable vertical ghost town. Visual, dramatic aerial drone shot, flying perpendicular to the tower. The camera tracks the spectacular outline of the building, looking almost perfect, while the scathous text overlay plots the exact points of unseen engineering's strain in inflored orange narrator. As the sun sets over Shenzhen's Bay, the bright LED lights of the Grand Horizon Automotive Tower flicker to life, casting a brilliant golden reflection across the water. To the outside world, to the commuters driving down Binhai Avenue, it remains a staggering symbol of technological triumph and unimaginable wealth. The pristine glass curtain wall shows no exterior wounds. The Desheng Vader continues to run, quietly hoisting multi-million yuan supercars into the sky. But beneath that flawless, glittering facade, the physics do not care about the branding. The laws of gravity do not care about the German luxury licensing agreement or the status of the billionaires inside. Every second of every day, the relentless, structural weight of 195 meters of concrete is grinding against a dissolving baseline. The countdown isn't waiting for the marketing team to invent a new excuse. The ground is moving, the structural stress is compounding, and the silence is running out. Visual. Wide drone shot of the Binhai Avenue waterfront at dawn. The camera lowers to reveal a forest of construction cranes wreathing in the mist along the Shenzhen Bay coast. New monoliths are under construction, just meters away from the sinking tower sects. Low mechanical hum of cranes, distant seagulls, high-tension wire snap. Narrator. If you think the crisis ends at the property line of the Grand Horizon Automotive Tower, you are missing the most terrifying dimension of this structural ledger. As you watch this right now, the construction cranes are still spinning. The concrete trucks are still lining up in multi-mile queues along the coastal expressways of southern China. New mega projects, new branded sky mansions, and new mixed-use residential developments are rising on the exact same barrier zones, on the exact same waterlogged sand, and above the exact same porous, shifting granite strata that is failing to support the tower next door. The Grand Horizon is not a singular engineering anomaly. It is an unvarnished window into the future of urban coastal development across the entire Greater Bay Area. Graphic. Screen splits into a map of 3 major reclaimed districts: Shenzhen Bay, Guangzhou, and Zhuhai Chengmai. Every zone flays with an active subsidence risk icon narrator. Following a series of high-profile construction scares across the province in recent years, municipal housing bureaus and construction commissions across China promised a sweeping regulatory overhaul. Local governments launched intense structural stability mandates, targeting older high-rises built during the unregulated real estate surges of the late 1990s. It was supposed to be the ultimate safety net for urban investors. But instead, it exposed a staggering regulatory blind spot. Those emergency inspection protocols were designed entirely around aging structures, buildings that have crossed the 20 or 30-year threshold. The Grand Horizon Automotive Tower, along with dozens of other shifting luxury skyscrapers flanking Binhai Avenue, is under 10 years old. Because these structures are classified as ultra-modern, Tier 1 engineering assets, they completely escape the mandatory structural audit triggers. They exist in a massive regulatory gray zone that existing safety legislation simply does not reach. SFX. Drilling sounds cut out, surgically narrator. The definitive scientific tracking data, compiled by the China Academy of Building Research, makes this gap terrifyingly clear. High-performance high-rises are perfectly capable of absorbing a pre-calculated amount of uniform downward settlement across their entire structural base over a decade. What they cannot absorb, what the building codes never anticipated, is the internal shear forces generated by a coastal strip where neighboring plots are excavated simultaneously, altering the local water pressure and accelerating differential movement. Furthermore, no current local housing regulation requires a private developer to disclose satellite-derived interferometric radar data to an investor closing a deal on a secondary market penthouse. If the seller keeps quiet and the property management company seals the maintenance logs, the buyer is completely blind. The marketing remains a flawless shield against the shifting reality underneath. Visual. Cut to the developer. Last press. Conference footage. Li Dezheng stands before a giant screen, applauding the unveiling of a revolutionary new project design. FX. Spotlights clicking on. Pulshecht. Corporate Apple narrator. But here is the ultimate twist in the narrative, and the clearest sign that the calculated risks of the real estate industry are simply being passed down to the consumer. Li Dezheng hasn't stopped building. In fact, his consortium has just broken ground on their next ultra-luxury branded megastructure, located just 800 meters down the same stretch of Binhai Avenue, the Imperial Bentley Executive Residences. Graphic. Flee-through of the Bentley Residences mortal, 63 stories, 4 separate driven car lifts, 300-meter apex narrator. This new tower will stand 63 stories tall. It will feature not one, but 4 independent Dezheng Vader car lifts running simultaneously through a massive central core. Entry-level units are listed at 35 million yuan, with the triple-level crown jewel penthouse listed at an eye-watering 390 million yuan. It sits on the exact same coastal silt. It relies on the exact same friction pile engineering assumptions. It is being anchored into the exact same coastal shelf where 35 buildings are already actively sinking. Every new piling driven into the ground along this bay is an unspoken admission that the original engineering promise, the absolute guarantee that this coastal earth could support any amount of weight without moving, no longer exists. Visual. Focus drifts slowly from the new construction road play back to the rear glass curtain of the Grand Horizon Automotive Tower. The sun picks up ultra-fine corrosion lines around the subsurface water seals narrator. The Grand Horizon Automotive is no longer just a luxury address for the elite of southern China. It has become a physical case study in how a multi-billion yuan engineering risk is weaponized, packaged, and transformed into a long-term structural crisis for the unsuspecting people who live inside it. Right now, as you watch this, the tower at number 1888 Binhai Avenue sits exactly 3 inches lower than it did when its initial foundations were poured. The automated car lifts are still humming, the supercars are still rising 50 floors into the sky. And the structural reality of what happens when that differential movement exceeds the tipping point remains entirely unaddressed on the public record. No independent structural engineer has published a certified roadmap for how to stabilize a 60-story twisting core once the marine clay liquefies. No legal proceeding has established who pays the bill when the building becomes structurally uninsurable, when the very earth beneath a luxury empire is actively dissolving. And no law forces the creators to speak. Who ultimately protects the people holding the keys at the top? SFX, Urgent Cable News, narrator. If you want to track this structural countdown as it moves through